Today's presentation is by Cornelius Gould, who you may know as, I'm going to call him a processing guru, as well as I believe Mike Catfish, Dosch, and Mike Gould from Angry Audio are all going to probably hop in a little bit as well. Basically, we're going to talk a little bit about streaming audio and level standards and some stuff like that. So take it away, Corny.
All righty, I'll have it tossed over to Catfish to get things started. He'll do
Hey
the
guys,
overview.
wait.
Oh.
Before we go any further, Corny,
well,
first of
you
all,
then.
Yeah, first I'm going to start by saying, hey guys, I'm sorry we got the dates overbooked for today. This is all my fault. I heard from Corny that he wanted to put the Virginia meeting together, and Catfish and I agreed. And then a couple of days later, I heard from one of my resellers, and they said, hey, we got an SBE meeting, and she gave me the same date and time. And I said, oh yeah, we're all over it. We've already agreed to do it. And so that's kind of how we got the two groups merged together for today. So technology, it's great. We can actually be in 3 places at one time. So I appreciate you guys having patience with us today, and I hope we learned something. And now I'm going to turn it over to Catfish.
Thanks, Mike. I get to introduce Corny. It's a privilege. He travels with an entourage. He's an audio processing guru, and so my job is to kind of set him up, and then he knocks down all the pins. So I have a little presentation I'm going to share with you. It's very brief, but it's the commercial portion of the program. You know, Corny doesn't do this because he's an engineer and doesn't know how to lie. So you know, he has me do this. And so I'm sharing my screen, so bear with me. Hopefully I won't screw it up. Were you able to see that?
Yep.
Okay, great.
Yes.
So we're Angry Audio. We started this business about 4 years ago, and the idea behind the company is that we make devices to help solve problems in broadcasting. And so we have a bunch of different products. We have headphone amps and Bluetooth gadgets and, you know, just all kinds of stuff. And I guess it was about 2 years ago that I had this notion that we should solve the problem in studios, in radio studios, that talent is no longer able to listen to themselves over the air because of all the latency introduced by digital systems. And a lot of engineers have, you know, graciously hooked up old analog processors and stuff like that so the talent could still enjoy themselves processed. But there's a lot of talent listening to themselves dry, and they're complaining about it. And I asked the question, why doesn't someone just make a multi-band processor that's just made for this? Of course, it would have to be cheap, but so I talked to Corny. He and I worked together at Telos, and he said, oh yeah, we could do that. And so what started out as let's make a headphone processor has turned into an entire product line built around Corny's ideas. And so it's pretty cool that it's blossomed the way it has. And I'll mostly just show you our Chameleon products before Corny gets into the specifics of C6S. Also, shortly after we started, Radio Systems went out of business, and we purchased the company. And so we discontinued a lot of stuff. We decided that we weren't going to market it as Radio Systems products anymore, but we do continue to manufacture a lot of the popular stuff under the Studio Hub brand name, including some products that used to be Radio Systems branded. I know it's confusing, but we're the Studio Hub guys now. And so this is the first product that we built together. This is the C3 headphone processor, and it's a multi-band processor, and it's the first one to use Chameleon technology in it. And Corny will get into this more in depth, but I'll just kind of give you the layman's overview of what Chameleon technology is. It's decades of Corny's thinking about how to automate things that are going on inside a processor. So it's not unusual if you go buy a fancy processor, even one that Corny might have designed, like the Omni 11, and it'll have 4 zillion controls, or maybe 11 billion controls that you get to adjust. And hopefully you can, adjust the processing parameters and make things sound good. And there's presets that people share and whatnot. I'll introduce this idea because it makes you think a little bit. Every preset is a compromise. Every single one is a compromise. It's optimized for a particular format or a particular audio signature. But it'll do well for that, but it won't do well for something else, which is why most of the processors have, day part organizers and, automated switching and things of that nature. Corny asked the question, what would happen if the processor actually listened to the content that was going through the processor and made its decisions automatically based on a table of things that I know should happen when it sees content like this, and then the content itself? So in a way, it's an expert system because we're analyzing the audio as it comes in and making processor parameter decisions automatically. And it's kind of a scary thing, because what you're looking at is a modern multi-band processor that sounds amazing, and it doesn't have any controls on it. It's fully automated. And so this is Corny's recipe, I guess you could call it, and it's pretty brilliant. Our second product after the C3 headphone processor was the C4 live stream audio processor. And this was just kind of a natural evolution. Look, if we can make headphones sound good, we can make live streams sound great too. And so this is a 4-band processor. It's optimized for streaming, has a built-in limiter. It has a few presets. All presets are compromises, but in this case, it's setting the aggressiveness level. And so you're able to say, I want very light processing or medium processing or heavy processing, but still, even under those 3 choices, it's making the decisions itself based on the AI software. This is the back of a C4. It's also the back of the C3, the C4, and the C level processors, which I'll show you in a moment. So, just so you know, it's got the usual complement: analog in, analog out on Studio Hub connectors, as well as XLR, of course, and digital in, digital out. So AES in and AES out. And so they're pretty straightforward, simple boxes, all under $1,000. So we kind of broke a price barrier there. I think in general, processors, even the low cost ones, cost multiple thousands of dollars. And so we're kind of occupying a new niche. And then this is the C-level studio processor. By the way, if the 3 of these look similar, it's because they're based on the same hardware, but they are different software. And the C-level is Corny's answer to the studio processor. Maybe you'd think of this as a compeller replacement or an Ariane replacement. And so it does a great job of leveling out audio. You can put it on the studio side of an STL link, so it'll protect STL from overload, and it also acts as a preprocessor. So we've got a number of clients that are buying it just for that purpose, where they'll stick this in front of an Orban or an Omnia processor, turn off the wideband AGC in the processor, and use this instead, and get a much improved sound. And I'll move on. I'll just briefly tell this story because it's great. So we had one customer who bought 25 of these for all of his stations, and he had previously been an Ariane fan, and then he tried this and liked it better than Ariane. But he was putting this in front of Omni 11, and so I mentioned it to Corny, and Corny said, "Yeah, I don't think that's going to make a difference." And so it's like, well, okay, you would know, you designed the Omni 11 and this, so you would know. And but he went ahead and tried it and called me back and said, you know what, it actually does make an improvement. It's pretty nice. So he kind of verified what this customer was hearing. This has been really popular for us. And then today, Corny's going to talk to you about our new C6S live stream software, which I believe we have on the air at VPN. So you could demo it if you wish to. So I won't talk to you about this, just show you a picture, and Corny will get into more details with you. This is new. We just introduced Lean Encoder stream encoding software. And so this is it's a headless software, so it can run as a service on a PC, on a Linux machine, even on a Mac. And it will host our streaming processor as a VST plugin. And so what ends up happening is your lean encoder becomes the audio interface and the audio encoding device, and then it acts as a wrapper around our processor. So you could look at our processor as a plug-in into this lean encoder, and they work really nice together. So that's a brand new product. We are now into microphone processing. This is the smooth mic processor, and so this is designed specifically for SM7s and SM5s and SM7s of all suffixes, A's and B's and DBs, and no suffix. It's a little unusual. People always ask me the question, why did you make a mic processor that only works with one mic? Well, it doesn't. It works with a mic family. Any of the Shure dynamic microphones sound fantastic with this, but there's actually some pretty good logic behind it. Everybody who's ever had to use a mic processor has spent a lot of time trying to set it up and getting it to sound right. And we hear a lot that, it's never quite right. I worked really hard to make it sound a particular way, but it wasn't quite the way I wanted it to sound. Well, one of the challenges when making a mic processor is you have to design it to work with anything. So it needs a lot of range on those adjustments to be able to accommodate anything you might plug in. So our thinking was, what if we know exactly what microphone you're going to plug in? How does that change what we do in the DSP? And it changes a lot. The anecdotes we get back from customers who buy this is they plug it in and they instantly hear the processing they've always wanted to hear, and they don't touch it. It's like, they just take it out of the box and they plug it in and they're just amazed. And what's amazed me is how few people will actually take the front panel off and make adjustments because it just sounds so good out of the box. The adjustments are very subtle. So maybe another way of saying this, some people appreciate this. You would have to work really hard to make this sound bad. It just, it's made to do what it does with a Shure mic, and it sounds fantastic with a Shure mic. And people always ask the question, this is round back. So you've got a microphone input, low noise, high gain, line output, an ASEBU output, even a remote control connector. So you can introduce on-off cough functionality, more in a podcast environment where you don't have a broadcast console. You can do that right here in the mic processor. And then everyone asked me, so you did smooth, you did the Shure mic, what about the Electro Voice RE mic? And so we have this also. This is the Rebel, the smooth SM Shure mics, the Rebel RE EV mics. There's the key to the names. This is made for the Electro Voice RE20, 27, RE320, and same idea. It's the algorithms are based on those microphones, and so if you plug one of those in, you're going to get instant satisfaction, and everything is optimized for those particular mics. And so those are a couple of new products from us, and that's all. Commercial's over. Corny, why don't you tell them stuff they actually want to hear?
Can I ask a question first?
Yes, sir.
You had to say podcast, and it just got me to thinking, I did not see a USB output there, did I?
You did not, no, but we've actually had that question a few times, and it's a good question. So we're not done.
Okay.
Yeah,
thank you.
Done. Right now, what you would do is you'd plug this into our USB audio interface, and so
got it.
But that's a couple $100 more, and you're not off the railroad here. So
okay,
Corny, you go ahead and take it away. I'm going to stop sharing now.
Okay.
Okay.
So one of the things that we were asked to talk about a little bit more is the C6. So I'm going to show the C6 here. Let's see if I can trying something different here. Let's see here. Figured I'll do this in real time. Are you guys seeing that?
Looks good,
Okay.
Corny.
Okay, cool. So this is the C6 processor here. It's on one of my development machines here, and also the one I use for if we have any things that customers want to ask us about. And what we have on the front here are the controls that you use to adjust the audio chameleon, and you'll see there's 6 controls, and so that's all there is for shaping the sound. And there's a couple other things we'll get into in a moment. You'll have right now, you can see the 4 bands of audio processing that it has going on there. There's the final limiter section and the loudness leveler, which is used to set your output loudness target, and it's based on the whole loudness system that everyone knows as LUFS and all that. We'll talk about what that is in a moment, because that was the other thing that I was asked to describe here. And so we have on this front screen here a couple of cool things here. One is you can set your gating, and the behavior of the gating you can choose, whether it's just an outright freeze, which is how this is set up right now, or you can have it, if you change it to gate to 0, to be more like AGC type, it'll kind of rest at 0 here, and it'll either expand or compress from there if that's what you want it to do. The gate freeze gives you more of an aggressive sound if you're doing a pop thing. And one of the things we have here is one of the controls is the gate adjustment. So as I adjust the gate, you'll see over here on the left of the input meters here, a little caret that moves up and down with it. And that is showing you what the reference is for the gate threshold. So, and it's a reference to what's coming into the box, the raw audio coming into the box. And no other controls has any effect on where the gate is. It's just purely based on what it sees coming in. So if I move the threshold above where the audio is, you'll see that the caret starts to turn blue, and that means it's gated now. So it's just frozen. You see the multibands just kind of sitting there. And so that makes it a nice reference, because usually it's kind of hard to tell, what your gate is actually doing on most processors. Okay, I'll adjust until it does what I want, but you don't really know kind of where it is. So that's kind of a cool thing there. You'll see these on the multibands here. You see these little gate override indicators here. And what that is that the chameleon has multiband gating, but it's controlled by the smarts in the processor. And that's where we get into where Catfish was talking about there, where it uses, based on what's going on right now and the history of what's happened in the last several seconds in your audio program, it uses that information to adjust the response time of the multibands. So if you want to on this, like on the C level, it's a different version of processing. It's not the same processing that's in here, but C level, C4, and all that, they have the a front panel switch to adjust how aggressive it is. On the software here, it's this control called density. So as you ride the density control up higher and higher, it'll start to react a little bit more, and you'll see the bands moving around. And again, it's not a dumb increase in density. It's taking into account what's going on in the programming. So it's being a little more aggressive about it, but it's being smart about how aggressive it is. So it tries to keep the audio sounding as smooth as possible, even though you told it to make it more aggressive. And as you decrease the density, it gives you more of a relaxed sound, and it kind of runs things slower, response times across the processor. You can kind of think of it as slowing the releases down, but it's not just that. There really is no release time. It's dynamically controlled. You have another control here called the detail control. And as you increase this control more and more, you get more of that. You'll hear some finer details of the music come forward. You also hear the mixes sound a little more consistent, and there's some spectral correction that it does as well. And it kind of gives you that effect that you have when you stack in more processors in the chain. But the difference here is that it's the same processing functions that are normally operating. You're just telling them to make it more consistent. So you don't have algorithms fighting each other. It's just the same set of algorithms enhancing the spectrum more or less. And then you've got the low and highs controls, and they basically tell the chameleon, okay, I want this mix to be a little more bassy or a little bit less bassy or higher or whatever. And it's not just static EQs. It's actually adjusting the algorithms and their thresholds and all that to give you a more brighter sound or less brighter and all that. So it's a different approach to processing here. And it's the idea is to get you something where you can just set it and forget it kind of thing. And that's the whole idea. And you're not having to run back and tweak this little thing here and have to run back and find a control number 10,000 to tweak there. And that same tech is what makes it possible for us to have the simplified hardware boxes where, you're just basically manipulating more or less the density. And there's a little bit of things that goes on as you control the switch that gives you a little more lows and highs and all that as well. The other part of this is the loudness leveler. So when you hit this little tab here, it takes you to different processing sections. And this middle tab here for loudness is the loudness leveler. This is the version of C6S that is, we're wrapping it up to be an update to the software that's out there right now. And one of the things that we changed we changed a couple of things here on the loudness page, but one of them is we have a rolling 30-second integrated loudness meter now versus the Infinity one where you have to keep resetting it, which is on the current software. This is something I've been wanting to do for a while, and we'll get into what that means in a second. You also have a momentary loudness meter and a short-term loudness meter. And I'll rev up a whole presentation to have to talk about what all that means and how you use these. But at the end of the day, the whole point is that you can set a loudness target, and depending on how aggressive you make the processing, it'll make sure that it happens. If the audio were to go beyond that loudness target, you'll see the little loudness gain reduction stage kick in, and it'll reduce the activity into the finer limiter to keep the loudness below your target. Or if you want to be aggressive about it, you can drive more sensitivity into it, and it'll kind of ride the program more and more to keep the loudness at a higher level. I'm not sure what I have feeding this now, but if as you do that, it'll start to level out things a little bit more consistently. But it does kind of reduce your dynamic range overall. So I like to tell people just to set it to where you're seeing about a couple loudness units of gain reduction or whatever. And then the last part of C6 is our codec camouflage page here. And here you can pick a target codec. And what the Chameleon does is it has codec conditioning stuff that I've been working on for the last 3 or 4 years or so, things that's been rattling around in my head for a long time. And so you have that, and it also kind of modifies the processing a little bit to be friendlier towards these codecs. So it's a nice and easy way to pick, your target and just be done with it. And it does its thing. There's not a lot to do other than you just know it's optimizing things for those codecs. We have an option you can choose or not choose. It's this mono bass. And that's one of the things we got as feedback from our users, where they're saying, I've been playing around with streaming for a long time. And, and I noticed that when you mono the bass, it helps with the artifacts. And I was going, and I responded, yes, I noticed the same thing. Thanks for the idea. And we put that in there for people to use. So that helps out with reducing codec artifacts as well. So I'm going to stop here if you've got any questions on the C6. And I did that kind of fast because it's a split thing with the loudness stuff that I'll get into next. So I'll stop right there at the moment, see if you've got questions. Oh, Roz, your mic sounds great. This is the audio using the RE20 and the Chameleon Rebel mic processor on it. So you are hearing the Rebel mic processor as I speak. Okay, so there are no questions. I will jump into the loudness stuff, which is another thing that they wanted to know about. And I think it was the VPN folks are using the C6, and they saw the loudness and they were wanting to know more about that. So we are going to share again. I guess it'll be that same screen. I should have left it up. And I will start. Okay, so everybody can see that. Okay. Okay. So basically, after using these meters for so long, I've come up with a good way of describing it now that I got my head around it and how to use it. So we're going to start with the tried and true meter for subjective loudness adjustments, and that is the old VU meter. And the VU, for any folks who never knew what that stood for, it stands for volume units. And basically what it is, it's you take the audio and you just measure it coming off across your program line, and you average it through a 300 millisecond rise and fall time, which is, and since the meter is mechanical, that's determined by the ballistics of the mechanics in the meter. And the scaling on that is based on the log 10 scale, because, you know, human hearing, the loudness change that we hear is a logarithmic scale. So the meter is calibrated that way. And it's been in use for a long time. And it got supplanted in recent years by another meter that is the, we'll get into in a second. But the thing is that the digital meters that you have now don't really show you a true representation of what your loudness is. And that's partly, in my opinion, what's causing a lot of these inconsistencies with loudness. And the old VU meter does a really good job of actually telling you what the loudness is. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a second. Now, this meter has its limitations, and a couple of them are, one is that it doesn't take into account what the various frequencies sound like to us, or like the Fletcher-Munson curve, and I'll show you that in coming up in a little bit. So when you have things like songs with heavy bass on it, it'll cause these meters to read really high levels, saying, hey, this is really loud. And yes, it's loud to the meter electrically, yes, but not to our ears. So you can have a lot of bass and stuff, and it doesn't really correlate to what these meters show. So that's kind of a minor thing there. Another limitation is that you can kind of sort of fool these meters a little bit, because you can, you know, have something that'll be 0 VU, but if you put a lot of compression on it, you know, it'll still say 0 VU, but it'll sound louder, which is the ancient old trick that commercial people started doing in the early days of radio and TV, and they still do it to this day. And they keep pushing it more and more, especially concerts. They compress the snot of it, try to sound louder. But it still is better than the full-scale program sample peak program meters, which are everywhere on every digital workstation and all that. Now, what they're really good at is showing you how much headroom you've got left, because the VU meters are not very good at that. The VU meters are showing you like an average power level, but you could be clipping on your outputs if things aren't calibrated just right, and you don't really know that. So these meters are good for that. They're great for that, but they're lousy at trying to determine actual subjective loudness. So here's an example that where I use two cuts. One is a Fleetwood Mac tune that was, you know, kind of was remastered, but not heavily, as you can see from the waveforms. And the other is a Dua Lipa song. And I have comparisons here. When these are playing, I took screenshots of what the program peak sample meter is showing you between the two. And you can see here with these two songs, the program peak sample meter says they're the same level. And yeah, they are. The peaks of the waveforms match, but it doesn't tell you anything about loudness. And here, when you look down below, we've got the VU meter readings of both of these songs. And the VU meter is at least telling you that, hey, this song is really loud. You should probably back that down a little bit. And that's one of the things that the loudness LUFS meter is trying to show you in a newer way. So what we're trying to do now is the goal here is to have a way to actually measure what subjective loudness really is, or sensational loudness, as I put it, and allow you to make your content more consistent no matter how it's produced. And that's a big problem in this digital age now, where we're streaming things, where if you don't have some way to kind of ride through the differences in the way things are produced, your listeners are just getting hammered and with things that are loud and blowing them in the back seat, and other things that are not loud enough, they've got to turn it up, and the next thing blows them away. It's a big problem in file-based things such as podcasts and all that, which is why they kind of standardize at minus 16 LUFS voluntarily. And that's kind of where the industry in general for online streaming is trying to go. The AES just released a new standard for streaming loudness, recommendations, which is minus 16 LUFS. So these meters are an attempt to help you with that. So as I mentioned before, the two things that you have to take into account is frequency, and the other one is a new one, and that's time. And we'll show you a little trick here on this. And I don't know, I think the audio might play. Let me know if you hear this, but I have a series of tones here where they get progressively longer. They're the same volume, but the time, increases. So let's see if this will go. I think that went through. No?
I couldn't hear it.
Okay, well, we're not going to bother with the sound then since it doesn't go through. But you can, if you have a really short tone, it could be really loud, but you don't really notice it. But the longer it's around, the louder it seems, because there's that time factor that comes into play. And that's one of the things that the loudness meters takes into account when it shows you loudness. And the other is frequency. And this here is the Fletcher-Munson curve here. And it's simplified. If you see the actual Fletcher-Munson curve chart, there are a gazillion lines on it. And basically what it's showing you that is the volume is louder and louder. Our ears perceive sounds more evenly, and the quieter it is, the more uneven it is. So what this meter, with this graph is, we're going to concentrate on the green one here. It shows you at the beginning of the curve here on the left is bass frequency. So this is probably somewhere around 20 hertz or so. And as you go to the right, you're increasing in frequency. So to make 20 hertz sound as loud as 10,000 hertz, you have to boost it up quite a bit, by a lot. And we're going to focus on the two middle pieces here in the next slide. Now, for people that are trying to interpret this, one of the things I like to do is just kind of flip it around the other way. So this shows you how sensitive you are to these frequencies. So again, we're starting way down here, about 20, we're going up. This first arrow point, by the way, that's about 100 hertz. And the second arrow point here, that's about 100 kilohertz, or for the old timers, 1,000 cycles in frequency. And as you see, as you go up in frequency, we become more sensitive to it, and it's more annoying here. So, well, it's more annoying if it's a tone anyway. If it's music, it's enjoyable. So the meter has to take that into account, if you want to really, really show loudness the right way. And that's also why the VU meter, when you have lots of bass, it shows you a level that's louder, that looks louder than how we're hearing it, because we're not that sensitive to bass. So what's LUFS? It's basically taking into account time and frequency, and the whole thing came into play with the ITU-BS 1770 loudness measurement system in Europe, and it got adopted here in the U.S. for TV when some Congress people got annoyed with the loudness of commercial versus programming on over-the-air TV, and so TV adopted it first because of law. And it kind of worked its way through everything else in the digital media space here, because it does solve a problem. And one of the first things it does when you have a loudness meter is that it starts with an average of about 400 milliseconds, a measurement window, and it measures several blocks of audio over that window, and everything else from that is a multiple of that 400 millisecond time slice. And that 400 millisecond time slice is just a little bit longer than the 300 millisecond averaging of a VU meter, but that's your first clue. And in that 400 milliseconds, think of it sort of like the VU meter timing, averaging time. And like I said, we have the frequency weighting. So what you do is you run the audio through a filter where you roll the bass off, which is the purple line, and then another filter, the pink filter, is the K-weighted filter that is applied to the audio, which gives like a 5 dB boost to frequencies above 1 kilohertz. And that kind of simulates the sensitivity to the higher frequencies that we have. And then from there, you applied it to meters that show you different time frames. So as you saw in the chameleon here on our loudness meter on the page, you've got 3 different meters. And the first one is called momentary loudness, and that's your 400 millisecond average loudness reading. And you can think of that sort of like as a reference to what a VU meter would show you. And the second one is short term. And what that is that is a 3-second average of the 400 millisecond blocks that you see on the 1 meter. So they get progressively longer. And between these 2 meters, these first 2, that's what you can use to help you set your programming and know your loudness is good. And it also gives you the ability to determine some qualitative functions like dynamic range and all that. So on the momentary meter, because it's such a short time frame, you can let peaks go higher. So you can have, as you can see in this video loop here of the first meter, you'll see that it'll go well above -10 LUFS, which is the reference in this video, by the way. -10 LUFS is the reference. And you'll see the peaks go way beyond, which is good. It'll sound nice and open and dynamic. The second meter, because it's averaging over 3 seconds, is a little bit slower. So showing you a slower time frame, and it'll read closer to your target loudness more often. It'll go over a little bit as well, but that's not that big of a concern. And as far as like any regulatory or standards compliance, they're going to go by integrated loudness. And integrated loudness is kind of one of those things that's not really defined on what that time frame is. So most of the loudness meters right now that are out there are geared towards music production or file-based production, podcast, a song, or whatever. So it'll show you the loudness across that one piece of music, that one song, or that one podcast, and that's fine. So you run, or a TV program, if it's a video thing, it could be a 2-hour movie. And in that 2-hour movie, it'll show that on average, your highest loudness point was -24 LUFS, which happens to be the TV standard. And that's what you want. If you see that on your meter and your peak levels are correct, then you're good to go. And I will touch on that in a little bit too, because there's a little thing with peak levels that is important. For live streaming, that's a little bit different. And because you have a program that has no beginning and has no end, the second it's on, it's just going to go on and on. So that's where we had a change in our metering here to do the 30-second integrated rolling. And I chose that because that allows you to have a decent amount of dynamics in your audio if you want. And as long as every 30 seconds or so, you're either at or below your target of whatever that might be, if it's -16 LUFS, -10 or whatever, you're good to go. Because if it's every 30 seconds, if you're not going over your allotted, loudness target, you're good no matter how long you measure it. So that's the idea how to use that. And the integrated loudness meter is, in this case, since it's 30 seconds rolling, it's always going to be a little bit lower than the other meters unless your program content is just mashed. Like if you were to play noise through this, then you'll see all the 3 meters read the same because the noise is just a constant power. Or if there's a really smashed up metal song and they're just jamming along and there's no change, then you'll see all 3 meters just read the same, which will be your target loudness. And if you are seeing that on your programming content, you want it to sound good, well, your program content's not sounding good if all 3 are sounding or at the same level all the time. It's too processed. So you might want to rethink that. So that is my quick thing here on these meters. Any questions on this? By the way, I'm kind of rolling through kind of quickly because of the 2 topics, but if you've got any questions, feel free.
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay. You sort of already explained why, like when you use loudness meters, well, at least in my experience, open and open, I see a lot of different presets.
Mm-hmm.
YouTube, Netflix,
Yes.
Spotify, and I think because you have different targets, and
Mm-hmm.
they're not all consistent at the moment. Am I
Right.
correct? That
Yes. And there's,
also,
oh, go ahead. I was going to add to that, and there's a reason for that. Like right now, ideally, people would like to settle for now at -16 LUFS. Spotify is like minus 14. Somebody else is here. And a lot of it has to do with these smart speakers that they're using. So Amazon smart speakers are the way they designed them. The amplifiers don't get quite loud enough for everybody, especially the older speakers. So if you're at minus 16 and you got it all the way up, some things you will have a hard time hearing. So they did a compromise and they went for minus 14. And so that way they feel that with that on all their speakers, older and new, there's enough audio headroom there to get you to where you need to be and still not be too far off from the minus 16. You wanted to say something else too, so I'll let you.
Yeah, well, that kind of gets to my next question, which was the rumor around the industry was minus 14 as a target. And I guess that's just kind of a general, but then in reality, some guys are checking like CD releases and things like that, and are coming up like minus 9, you know, and stuff like that.
Yeah, in the music.
I know that's controversial, but anyway.
Well, the music industry is kind of funny. I kind of started following some of that, and a lot of them are kind of misunderstanding what the point is. So a lot of the controversy is they feel that people want them to master their albums at minus 16. I mean, minus 16 or whatever. And they're kind of going, that's rubbish, and we're just going to be quiet. And it's really more of make them aware, because what's going to happen is that when you play, if the listener wants the music to be all the same, they're going to engage that loudness matching in their playback, whether it's Apple Music or whatever. And so it's going to look at the file and knock it down to using LUFS to be at the same level as whatever it was they heard before at minus 16 LUFS. So if you really are smashing the snot out of your music and you're like at minus 6 LUFS or whatever on your song, by the time it normalizes it down, your song is just going to sound lifeless at minus 16 compared to an older song that's normalized to minus 16, where you've got some life and some dynamics. Yes, and dynamics. You can hear the drums, and the other songs just sounds like a quiet mess by the time you do that. And that's all. They're just trying to make people aware that when you master your albums, just know this is what's going to happen. But in today's world, everybody seems to take an extreme position on whatever, and you've got this camp that goes, "I'm not doing my album minus 14," and put out all these videos and just cause all this controversy over nothing. You know, so.
Yeah, let me interject for just a second, if you don't mind. We have a white paper that Corny wrote on loudness that covers a lot of these topics.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you go to audiochameleon.com, and that's just one word, you'll see his white paper. And there's also a couple of other papers there that talk about standards, like the AES standard, for example. So just those are resources to you. They're free. We publish them. If you can't find it, email Corny or me. We'll get you fixed up. Okay.
Cool. And I'm going to just quickly show you this one. This is another cool loudness meter. It's really meant for file-based things, but it does have some cool features that you can use if you're live streaming. And this is the Ulean loudness meter. And it has its momentary meters, this bar graph here, and it shows you dynamic range nicely. It has a little caret that floats up and down here. That's the short-term loudness, or the 3-second averaging. But the thing I like is this little histogram that rolls over on the side here, and you can let it go for hours if you want. And you can set it up. Here I have it set up where the white squiggly line here is the 400 milliseconds momentary loudness, and then the red part is the 3-second, short-term loudness measurement. And I find that kind of neat. When I'm working on things, I can evaluate how it's doing in a big long term with graphics versus a number that told me I'm good. So that's another one here. Just know that you have to reset it from time to time, because it's integrated loudness, which is kind of keep integrating, and then it just stops showing you anything useful until you hit reset again. Okay, so this is kind of I'm just going to go through this really quick, because we just kind of talked about that before. This is what the two songs that are peak loudness matched, and you can see where the first song, the Fleetwood Mac tune, is at minus 16 LUFS, and the Dua Lipa song is at minus 9 LUFS. So now if we were to normalize the two, and this is what the listener's playback system would do to make both of them at minus 24 LUFS, the Fleetwood Mac song looks pretty much like it did before. And the VU meter says, yeah, that's a nice level. and then you take the Dua Lipa song and you match it to minus 24 LUFS, the VU meter says, yep, same loudness, and it works pretty neat. So the VU meter still, even though it's not a LUFS meter, it's still useful to have around. So drag out your mechanical meters and use them. The peak sample meter, on the other hand, is showing you that the levels are quite different. And on this one, the scaling on these are a little more logarithmic than on other devices. But this is something that some users of C level will get kind of confused about, where they'll put the C level in from, from an Arian or whatever, or compeller, and they'll see on the front panels on the processor might have a peak sample meter on it, and they'll say, hey, but the levels coming out are inconsistent. Sometimes the meter is higher and sometimes it's lower. And it's like, well, one of the things that C level does is that it loudness matches content at minus 24 LUFS if you want. And what that ends up doing for the processor is the processing sounds more even that way. So you don't have that double process thing going on when a Dua Lipa song comes on and it smashes it's already smashed the high heavens. And then your audio processor smashes it more because the average level is so much higher. So C level will bring that down and it'll sound a little more natural and more relaxed through the processor, even though it's a smashed up song. So that's so that was a side thing to just kind of point out. So if you ever got interested in our C level and you saw that the sample meter, peak sample meters on your processor looks inconsistent with C level, it's because the peak levels are different because of the way they're produced. Just hang a little VU meter on there on the output, and you'll see that loudness wise it's matching them up. And again, the loudness, you're just pulling up the average. We all know that, but I'm just going to move ahead to the peak metering part. So there's true peak, and that's another part of the loudness specification that you'll see. So Apple Music or Spotify, they'll say we want, minus 16 or minus 14 LUFS at minus 1 dB true peak. And what that is that on the peak sample meter, what it'll show you is what the peak level is at every sample point. So think of audio as a film, and each frame of the film is clicking by, and it's, the motion of it's recreating the waveform. And you're looking at the moment that snapshot happens, you're looking at the peak level that the sample peak meter sees. That's not necessarily what's coming out of the D to A converter at the end user's point, whether it's the playback device. And that's because when you get to right about 1/2 the Nyquist, which at 48 kilohertz is about 12 kilohertz, you end up with, at the sample point, you end up with just only 2 points that are going to be there for peak measurements. And at times, it's going to be that you're not going to catch the actual peak. You're going to be looking at the sides of the waveform. And right now, what I just demonstrated is something that's almost at that half Nyquist point. If you're right at the half Nyquist point, then the 2 dots will be halfway down the waveform of the peak, which will actually be 3 dB down below the actual true peak value of the audio. Now, for digital audio, that's not a problem because the digital audio converters will recreate that peak because of just the physics of how the filtering works in the D to A converter. So the peak is never missing. It's there. It's going to come out the speakers and be exactly like it was on the input. But when you're looking at the raw samples of it, you could be totally missing the peak. So what they do in the metering is that they oversample the audio by 8x or 16x or whatever. So you get more sample points, and you get, so when you're taking the samples, you get a closer read on what the real peak is at any given moment in time versus the base sample rate. The same is true for any limiters that might be in their program limiters. If the algorithms are running and looking for peaks at the sample rate of the audio, then you'll end up missing some of those peaks. And that's what that whole sample slipping thing was all about in the early days of digital processing, where, if it's not looking faster than the actual sample rate, you're going to have all kinds of loose peaks coming out on the output of the processor. So with your peak meters, you have to make sure you've got oversampled true peak measurements as part of your loudness tool set, which most peak meters will have. The Uline has it, and even the Orban loudness meter has true peak well, I don't know if they have peak on it, but they don't really show you true peak, but most of others do.
By
And
the way,
let's
the error that you could get if, between peak and true peak could be as much as 3 to 4 dB if it's not oversampled.
right.
So that's a lot, especially
Yeah.
if you're thinking that, you're 3 dB away from clipping and you're actually clipping.
Yes. Or more accurately, the end user's playback device will be clipping by 3 dB. So AES I say R because I was part of the streaming recommendation committee there. So when I say R, that's as an hour. That's what I mean. So the best practices that the AES recommends for streaming loudness is about -16 LUFS, and they picked that because it's a reasonable spot, and also if you're playing like raw program content through, you would not be hitting the final peak limiter very often. So that way you're not altering the music too badly, which is why -16 is there as a compromise. I think ultimately the entire program content world would like to be at -24 LUFS, but everything right now is designed for music that was produced at 0 dB true peak and as loud as you can get it. So it's going to take a while before people eventually redesign audio equipment and have stuff fall out of the woodwork, if it ever does, to be able to get to -24, which is what they would love to have. So for now, it's -16. And for streaming, the audio target loudness should not be lower than -20 right now, because then you're really quiet. And for short form programming, 60 seconds or less, you want to have the short term loudness meter be no more than 5 loudness units higher than the target. And that is the key to do if you're using these meters or looking at them. If your short term meter peaks no more than 5 dB, 5 loudness units, which does translate into dB. It's just that loudness units is a dB with the frequency contour correction applied to it. So if you keep it within 5 in a short 60-second or less period of time, keep it within 5 loudness units of your target, not going over that, you generally will be okay with with your target there. And the maximum peak level for true peak should not be more than -1 dB true peak. And that just kind of allows for whatever slop you might have in the system downstream to not be much of a problem. Sometimes you'll see some services will want to be at -2 dB true peak, maybe -3, depending on whatever the codecs they might be using that might overshoot. But in general, it's usually around -1 dB true peak. And to get into one of the things that one of our audience members brought up, these are some of the standards that are in use by various services right now. And the TV folks definitely know about the -24 LUFS one, and -23 and -24. They're kind of interchangeable between the US and Europe. Netflix -27, and that's because they want their effects to be really standing out. So they kind of standardize there. Sony is kind of the oddball. They're at -18. Nobody knows why, but most people are at the upper end of things, -14 and -16. And besides these website links that Catfish gave you, you can find more information on the loudness. We have links there, and I have my paper there as well. And these are you have the AES 77-2023, which was just passed last year as an actual AES standard for streaming loudness. AES 71 is where it all came from. And TD 1008 is one you can find pretty easily that goes into more in depth on some of the loudness standards. And if you really want to put on your propeller hat and go crazy with all the technical stuff, there's the ITU BS 1770-4 standards, which is a pretty dry read. So, but it'll tell you everything you want to know. So thank you very much for listening to that. If you've got any other questions, I'm available. And hopefully I didn't go too fast, but I tried to not make it drag on too much there.
Hey, Corny, I've got a question. This is Joe.
Yes.
The screen that you shared a minute ago with Sony and Apple and
Yes.
Amazon and et cetera, do you anticipate them getting closer towards one consistent level as more and more start to adopt the AES 77, or do you anticipate them still being a little bit in their own realm?
I think the world in general is probably going to try to go closer to -24 than -16. -16 is kind of seen as an intermediate step because of just the way things were produced and put out there over the years. It's more on the loud side than quiet. As a reference for you, -24 LUFS is basically 0 VU on a standard VU meter. So, or -18 dB on a peak reading meter on your consoles. And it's that way, obviously, for headroom. So they will love to have -24 be the standard, because then everybody has plenty of headroom to play with. It's just a matter of how things are going to shake out to see if they really get there or not, or is -16 going to be where we're at. So it's probably more of a matter of people either going to -16 or -24. And I think video services are going to be -24 because it was mandated that way. So they're going to be hovering there.
Yep.
Any other?
Are you saying, Corny, that the government got it right that time? Wow.
Well, the government, fortunately, they just took what Europe was doing and applied that. So that was already decided. I don't know what the process was for that, but if the government actually came up with something, it would have been really bad. So those guys don't know technology if it hit them upside the head.
All right. Any other questions? Hey, Corny.
Yes. Were you messing with me or did you freeze?
I'm messing with you.
Okay. You can
Oh,
never
Yeah, that's
tell.
my fault. Sorry about that, guys. Lost my connection.
No problem. Do you have any questions, Todd?
Well, I was asking about the latency. Was there any way to solve like a return trip audio latency with an analog front end that anybody's come up with?
Can you give us some context?
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
Well, I'm talking about like, say, for instance, we have an IQX board. We have several of them. And you're hearing the return trip, and there's a 5 to 10 millisecond delay from the time you speak, and it makes the round trip, and it gets back to your headset, your headphones. It can be a little distracting. If you have a strong engine, it's like 0.25 milliseconds. It's undistinguishable. It's more than 5 milliseconds or so, it becomes a little bit distracting.
I have to put on my Axia hat for a moment. Yes, there is a way to solve this, but it's outside of broadcast. It's done all the time inside of recording studios, for example. They will have something called zero latency monitoring, where what you do is you blend in your local microphone along with some kind of a return feed. And so then you get instant U in your headphones, and then you get something back. And that something back really needs to be a mix minus of some kind. It needs to be,
Exactly.
but you,
right.
yes. And
so it looks like an interface, like a Focusrite interface with direct monitoring.
Yeah, exactly. Usually there's something in the driver or something in the DAW application itself that deals with that's able to compensate for latency and create a mix minus and that kind of thing. It's interesting that it hasn't happened in broadcasting. And we at Angry Audio actually we're working on some products. Can't tell you about them just yet, but we're calling them edge devices, and they sit out at the very edge of the program, in where the talent is, for example. And one of the features that we think we're going to be maybe even like leading the way on is the idea of me and more me, less me, and mix minus return. So we're looking at interfaces that we could make as companion products to, for example, something like an IQ. Well, what do they call that new? Telos has a new software console, and so Altus, I think. Yeah, Altus is what it's called.
Yeah, that's it.
And so, you know, the idea, I look at that and I think, well, there's only one thing missing, and that is, you know, something to deal with the latency. And because it uses codecs to you know, to transmit and receive the audio, and they're, you know, 300 millisecond codec is completely unworkable. So, you know, you mentioned that 5 milliseconds can be annoying. Imagine, you know, 305 milliseconds.
No.
Right. So we think there is a, you know, there is a need for something like that out at the edge, and it, you know, for whatever reason doesn't exist yet in broadcast. So we're stay tuned.
What I was thinking about was like an interface that you could connect to the Axia network and create your own mix minus with that interface, and you could use the analog front end for your headphone mix, and then everything else feedback mix minus, something to that degree.
That would be the way to do it. Yeah, somehow.
If you come up with this, please let me know.
Okay. All right. Well, stay tuned.
Thank you.
All right.
Corny and Catfish, I never got to ask, but I think you understood. Is it okay that we recorded this, and can we play it back on our YouTube channel?
Of course.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. I think
Thank
I think
you.
we end up getting exposure that way, and it's all good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Also, something that I thought was interesting is that Catfish has a bunch of different dongles basically for anything. So he'll make dongles and for adapting all sorts of things for XDS and to Wheatstone, to Axia, to everything. So I said I didn't think it was publicized enough, so I just wanted to bring that up.
You did say that. Yeah. If something you have has a D connector on it, we make a dongle for it. We have hundreds of them. In fact, they're not even in, you know, like we couldn't keep up with publishing them anyways, because we're making a new custom one, you know, every couple of weeks for somebody. So it either exists if you're trying to wire it up either to Studio Hub or even just to RJ45 for Logic. It'll go D connector to RJ45 or D connector to 2 RJ45. We make, you know, we have a couple of hundred of these, and if we don't have it, we'll make it for you. So yeah.
And my favorite, the headphone disconnector.
Oh, there you go.
Little magnetic thing. If you go to walk away by accident, it just pulls apart. And we got to plug it back in so I can hear myself. Anyway,
Nice.
so that way you don't end up trashing either the headphone jacks on the consoles or your headphone cable itself. I like these. Oh, I just disconnected again. There you go. Now I can hear myself.
Hey, I like your headphones, by the way. I received a pair visiting a friend in Germany last week.
What was that again?
The headphones you're wearing, I
Oh.
just received a pair of those from a friend in Germany last week. I love them.
I love
Yeah.
the buyers. Yeah, they're
Yeah,
great.
I was looking for some to because I was working with the microphone processors, and it's been forever since I've had headphones I really like that I can tell what's going on. And I went through a whole bunch of them, and I finally tried these out. I was like, that's it. Yeah, these are the ones I can hear what's going on.
Hey, Corny,
said
for
where?
those of us that don't recognize them, what kind of headphones are they?
These are the Bayer DT 770.
770s.
Yeah, 770s, and these that
Mhm.
I'm using are the 80 ohm ones. Nice little compromise there. They do make the 32 ohm ones, but I hear that they're a little they're not as flat sounding as the 80 ohm ones. The 200 ohm ones are flattest, but you need some serious headphone amp to drive them. So
Their open back sets are nice too.
yeah,
Yeah, real nice.
Well, we do make a headphone amp that swings like plus and minus 15 volts.
you gotta send me one.
I got to send you one, huh? Okay. All right.
That's
So you
another
won't-
reason. Every
You
time we
won't
do
talk
one of
about
these,
our headphone amp unless you have one there to drive your buyers, huh?
what I don't remember them.
All right. Fair enough.
Every time we do a meeting, I always ask you, I need one of those.
I
I'll
know,
send
and then
you one.
I forget. I'm awful.
Great. Any other questions?
Real quick, I don't see it on the on your website. but have y'all given consideration to making a monitoring, level monitoring device based on the LUFS, the new standard? In other words, to be able to put it in line somewhere and see what's going on.
You thinking about a meter, maybe like a loudness meter?
Yeah, like a meter. I mean,
Yeah.
and I guess, you know, what pops into my mind is the old Duro from the 80s, you know, something like that. Because I remember having long ago, when I was a jock, we had one sitting right on top of the console. And so, yeah, the console meters did what the console meters did, but, you know, we had that Duro meter to really to look at right in our faces to watch our levels. But not just that, not just for operators, but I'm thinking also to be able to put it in, you know, various places in the chain and see what's going on.
Interestingly, our Angry Audio first product was a loudness meter. And it was actually kind of an experiment because I was still working a job at that point. And so I was kind of curious if I used contractors to help, you know, write the software, do the circuit board layout and all this kind of stuff, could I make a product? And it came out great. I've got one in my office, but I never actually turned it into, you know, like a commercial product. So I probably should dust that thing off and bring it back to life because it worked great. So it's I guess maybe at the time I thought this was more of an experiment for me, and I didn't really think that people would be interested in it. But maybe I'm wrong, and so we should maybe sell it.
Well, Catfish, Michael attests to the fact that I actually just bought one for VPM here. We have the Radio Systems digital consoles. So again, back to that style of metering, and especially with one of ours being classical, I found an old McCurdy rack mount thing that I put in the studio a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
You know, was it VU? Was it peak? Was it loudness? What was it?
It was VU.
Okay. Right. Yeah, maybe. You know, I'm thinking now. So let me Corny and we can go off and have our product brainstorm and figure out if we want to put that back into the mix.
Yeah, I think
you need to come to Nashville, Corny. You need to come. It's cold in Cleveland. You need to come to Nashville.
Yeah, I think the proliferation of these digital peak meters are just kind of really a big chunk of the problem with loudness control these days, or loudness consistency.
Cool. All right. Well, I'm going to wrap things up unless there are any other burning questions. I thank both of you very much and thank everyone for attending. And to the Florida SPE chapter, I will be sending the attendance sheet. I'll even send it to you, Catfish, just so you know who attended. So thank you all very much.
Well, thanks for having us. We're really grateful. Thank you.
Yeah. Yep. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks. Have a good evening.
Bye.
Thank you.